Hey, that was Anton Karas, the third man. Hi, everybody. I'm Randy Credico, live on the fly here on 99.5 FM in New York City, WBAI, Free Speech Radio, WBAI.org. Support the station, by the way. Go to give the number 2 WBAI.org. Give to WBAI.org. All right. All right. So I got to be honest with you. Yesterday, I taped the show for today, and the theme of the show was a new book by Nils Melzer, the special rapporteur on torture at the UN. But late in the day, Derek Chauvin was found guilty, and Nils, to his credit, said, "We got to talk about that." So that's what we're doing. That show will be archived, and I'll play it at another date. And so Nils Melzer, by the way, I want to get this right, folks, is the, and this is right in his wheelhouse, what we're going to talk about today, the George Floyd verdict and police brutality, etc. I'm going to actually read this because I never get it right. Professor Nils Melzer is the human rights chair of the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights. He is also professor of international law at the University of Glasgow. On November 2016, he took up the function. Now dig this, this is a long acronym, if I were to spell it out as an acronym. UN Special Rapporteur on Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment. Boy, that's a lot, Professor Melzer. Is that what I call you, or Dr. Melzer?
Just call me Nils.
Okay, I'll call you Nils. Thank you for calling me up yesterday and wanting to change the format of today's show, or the theme of it. And so we spoke yesterday. You know, the jury did find Officer Chauvin guilty on all 3 counts. What was your initial reaction? What is your reaction right now after mulling it over?
Well, thanks, Randy, for having me back on the program. I mean, I fully agree with that verdict. What we can see on the video footage that was made of the arrest and killing of George Floyd is a clear example of senseless police brutality and total disregard for human life and dignity, and for which there can be no justification whatsoever.
Right. So, but let me ask you this. I mean, it's been argued that Officer Chauvin was carrying out a lawful arrest. So talk about the rules that govern the use of force by police officers.
Well, obviously, as we know, use of force can be a legitimate and even necessary tool of law enforcement if it fulfills the criteria of, we say, legality, necessity, proportionality, and precaution. Let me quickly summarize this in a nutshell. So legality simply says that a police officer can only use force when they try to pursue a lawful purpose, such as an arrest, or in the present case. Then necessity asks, well, how much force? Well, do I need to use force to achieve that lawful purpose? And if I don't need to use force, well, I can't use force. If I need to use force, I can use force, but only as much as is necessary. So how much force do I really need to use and how much harm do I need to cause in achieving that lawful purpose? And then the third criterion of proportionality asks, well, the minimum harm that I'm likely to cause with that necessary force, is that really justified in terms of the seriousness of the crime I'm trying to address? And reminding everybody that George Floyd was suspected or alleged to have used a fake $20 bill, which even if he had done that would be just a minor offense. So it would not be justified to risk somebody's life, certainly, even to enforce the law on such a petty matter, really. And then the fourth kind of requirement is the requirement of precaution, which just generally obliges police officers to plan and conduct their operations always with a view to try to avoid, to the maximum extent possible, the use of force, and certainly the use of excessive or inappropriate force. So they constantly have to try to de-escalate situations rather than escalating them, and trying to ensure that no one gets harmed to the extent possible. Now, to be fair, we have to recognize that police officers have a very difficult job. It's easy to sit, in the armchair with the luxury of hindsight and then judge people from the certainty of those facts that maybe he didn't know at the moment. So they often have to intervene in situations quickly that are unpredictable. They may be confronted with people that are alleged to have committed petty crimes, but maybe they're innocent, these people. Maybe they actually did commit a petty crime, or maybe they're actually heavy criminals that were just by accident caught to commit while they were committing a petty crime, but actually they're armed and they're really dangerous and they have already killed people. They don't know that. So we have to give them certain credit, for that uncertainty. And in that sense, they are responsible, police officers, to ensure that the situation doesn't escalate into a dangerous situation for everybody involved, including the suspect, potential victims, and themselves. So when we look at how things evolved from the video footage, taken from the video footage, that we know how that case evolved, we can see that George Floyd initially was confronted by the police officer when he was sitting in his car and he refused to get out of his car. And so now the police officer, this is the first point where you can escalate the situation or de-escalate. And, we can see that he was forcibly dragged out of the car. He was a big man, so perhaps the police officers were afraid that he would be stronger than they were and tended to use more force and actually pull him out of the car at gunpoint. Now, this can cause anxiety in a person like George Floyd. So the police officers in their training have to anticipate these types of things, that someone can then start to struggle, not because he's a criminal and he wants to refuse arrest, but because he's panicking. Simply, he's afraid, to be manhandled that way in gunpoint. So I think there we can see that we have a clear escalation of the violence happening, and he's being wrestled to the ground when he doesn't want to get into the police car and taken into that position in which he died 9 minutes later, where Officer Chauvin was kneeling on his neck. At the latest, at this point, when he was on the ground, even if we don't discuss what happened before, whether it was appropriate or not, now George Floyd is 100% under control by the law enforcement officers, and they become 100% responsible for his life and well-being. And so here, they should have stabilized the situation, handcuffed him in a position where he cannot escape, but where he can freely breathe, he can relax, we can de-escalate, we can talk to him, calm him down, explain that, look, nothing dangerous is going to happen. We just want to know who you are and what really happened with that $20 bill. Don't be afraid. You can calm people down. You have to calm them down. But what we can see here is that from that point on, clearly the force that was used was excessive. It was not necessary. George Floyd did not resist. He could have been stabilized in that situation. And that was clearly visible to everybody around. I mean, even bystanders who have no experience, they're not medical doctors, they're not police officers. They just immediately saw this is a dangerous situation, the person can die. And they try to draw the attention of the police officers to that risk. And the three officers simply refused to take that into account. And that's where the criminal responsibility clearly comes in, and where I have no doubts that this is excessive use of force. And so the verdict, in my view, is absolutely justified.
All right. Well, let me just say this, that the, Chauvin's behavior, as you know, has been condemned by the police chief of that city and other officials across the country. Does this mean that he is the proverbial bad apple in an otherwise healthy police force in this country?
Well, I think that it's obviously difficult to say from the outside, but when you look at his behavior, I don't think that is the case. I don't think we can also say that justice has been simply served in this case completely. It has been served to a certain extent, that the individual has been held to account, as he should be, for a crime he has committed. Officer Chauvin, that is, in this case. But clearly justice cannot be returned by a verdict like this to the family, you cannot return George Floyd's life, the friends. So the damage is irreversible. And so here we have to look at this very serious event and look what is the background of this. The narrative of the bad apple is a very dangerous one because it somehow suggests that we have a scapegoat, that this person has committed a crime, he is the bad guy, and everybody else can basically wash their hands in innocence. And that's not the case here, because bad apples don't grow on healthy trees. You see, already the Bible says, by its fruit you shall know the tree. And this is really a proverb that is true. Even in healthy military and police forces, there can be individuals that have become bad apples. That's true. It does happen. They betray the values of the force. They violate the law. But such real bad apples, they have long, let's say, fallen off the tree, and they know it. So had Officer Chauvin been such a singular, exceptional bad apple, he would have known that he was doing something wrong, and that he would be held accountable for it. And so he would never have murdered George Floyd on camera. Right. Here, really, let's look at this. The fact that he and his fellow officers, they knew they were being filmed. They allowed this gruesome scene to be filmed and witnessed by countless bystanders. Everybody was aware that this man's life was at stake. This shows that these officers were genuinely convinced that they were almost entitled to kill George Floyd, or certainly to put his life at risk, and that they did not have to expect any form of accountability for it. But this kind of attitude is the product of a rotten tree. It's not a bad apple, it's a rotten tree, a police culture that has gone out of control.
Wow.
That does not, let me just clarify this. I think it's very important. I'm not saying that every police officer is a criminal. You know, I genuinely believe that, look, like everywhere, in all professions, police officers, most of them are doing their best to carry out their very difficult job in respect for human rights and dignity and with minimal resort to violence. But the sheer number of cases we see of people that get needlessly brutalized or even killed by police officers, not only in the US, but throughout the world, that shows that we have an increasingly misguided culture of tolerance and impunity for police violence.
Yeah, it seems to be an epidemic during this pandemic of police misbehavior. It is widespread. We are talking with Nils Melzer, the Special Rapporteur on Torture at the United Nations. I'm Randy Credico. This is Randy Credico live on the fly on 99.5 FM in New York City. We are talking about the George Floyd verdict. I want to continue. What, in your opinion, are some of the reasons for this misguided police culture?
Well, I believe that it has a lot to do with the identity that police officers give themselves, that the police have basically lost any sense of duty to serve the community. Instead, they perceive the population as an enemy. And let me tell you, here's why, in my view. In the last decades, particularly since 9/11, we can witness an increasing militarization of the police, not only in the US, but throughout the world. We have blurred the distinction between war and peace. We are in a constant war against terror, both abroad and at home. Police are increasingly trained and equipped in the same way as military forces, and they even dress like military officers. So it is no surprise that they develop the same attitudes that are similar to military forces, that operate in hostile environments of war. So everyone could be a terrorist. Every citizen is a potential enemy. So with this attitude, we no longer strive to serve and help and protect the community, but we believe that we have to fight and control and subjugate the community.
It's like they're an occupying force,
Right.
as it were, right? Well, who is responsible for this development? I mean, how do we change this? And what are your recommendations for change?
Well, of course, individual officers do have their own individual responsibility, and they have to be held to account for criminal conduct, such as it has been done now with Officer Chauvin. That's important. But it really is also the force as a whole, the commanders, and in particular, the political leadership, the state governors, and for the federal police, military forces, and intelligence services, also the the presidency and their administration, which bear the primary responsibility for fostering a culture of service and transparency and accountability. You cannot, Randy, you simply cannot tolerate military forces committing war crimes abroad, such as those that are shown in the infamous Collateral Murder video, another infamous video, or you cannot have the CIA kidnap and torture countless people around the world as a matter of policy and not prosecute any of these atrocious crimes, but grant impunity to criminals in uniform, basically, and then expect your law enforcement officers at home to abide by the law and treat your own citizens with respect and dignity. It just doesn't work like that. If a government grants impunity to its officials when they torture and rape and murder abroad, these crimes will eventually come back to haunt you at home. And we have seen that in the George Floyd case. It can become a veritable nightmare for your own population. Because just as Derek Chauvin is not just an exception and a bad apple in the police force, so do Abu Ghraib torture and the Collateral Murder massacre were not exceptional events either. So in all these cases, we happen to know about these facts because they have been filmed or photographed. Otherwise, we wouldn't know about it. But in all those cases, therefore, these are only the tip of the iceberg, the visible tip of the iceberg of a huge hidden kind of part of murder and torture and abuse that is being kept secret and classified, and that the government does not want the American public and the world public to know about. And that's why also it is so important to insist on transparency, on accountability, on press freedom, and effective public oversight over intelligence services and government.
Well, we would not have, this case wouldn't have gone forward if not for video. And everyone responded to the video, politicians, activists, around the world, not just in the US, around the world. And so, as you said, this is something that we do, the military does overseas. Why isn't the public outraged by the collateral damage and the war logs, the videos of the two Reuters reporters who were shot? Why are they trying to suppress that? Shouldn't we be outraged, and shouldn't there be some kind of accountability for that instead of going after Julian Assange?
Well, obviously, I mean, in that case, it was Julian Assange and his organization WikiLeaks that published that video, and along with it, plenty of other evidence for war crimes and torture and corruption. And none of these crimes have ever been prosecuted. But then the whistleblower, Chelsea Manning, that actually provided that information, and Julian Assange, the publisher, a foreign publisher who did not have any duty of confidentiality towards the US government, he published it. So these two people are being prosecuted for that. And I mean, we're talking about draconian prison sentences. I mean, Julian Assange is facing 175 years in prison for a nonviolent person who's never harmed anybody. The whole argument that his publications have, harmed U.S. lives, there's no evidence. The U.S. government has not been able to point to even any hints that that is true, and so he is being he's facing that prison sentence and an espionage trial in the U.S. and is being persecuted, I have to say, already for more than a decade. And while those that have actually committed the real crimes, we have video footage on, they walk free.
Well, to me, it's tantamount to the young teenager who videotaped the Floyd assassination, prosecuting her. It's like, all right, we're going to get her for videotaping this and showing it to the world. We're going to go after her. That's what they've done to Julian Assange, who has shown us war crimes. All right.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. If they did the same as they did with WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, if they did the same in the George Floyd case, it would mean that the police officers go free. They're not even being investigated, not tried or convicted. They're not even being arrested and investigated, while the person who filmed this and put it on the internet would be, put in solitary confinement for the rest of her life.
Right. We're talking with Nils Melzer, who has a new book out, by the way, and he discusses this in great detail. It's called The Case of Julian Assange, A Story of Persecution. And it's a bestseller now. It's in German. It's a bestseller. You can get it on Amazon if you read German, but it will be out in English in a couple of months. And it really, just the introduction, I read the introduction, like 8 or 9 pages, and I said, I want the entire 200 pages. Tell us about this book, The Case of Julian Assange, Mr. Melzer.
Well, yeah, usually special rapporteurs of the UN don't write books about individual cases because, when we observe cases of torture and ill treatment, we intervene with the governments and through diplomatic channels. And then the governments who have mandated me to do that, to investigate these cases, well, then they take over and investigate the case and bring perpetrators to justice. Now, in this case, the involved states, we're talking about the US, the UK, Sweden, and Ecuador. So, rule of law democracies of the West, they all refused to enter in a constructive dialogue with me. They refused to answer my questions, to give me the evidence I needed, so I couldn't investigate it, and they refused to take measures to protect Julian Assange's human rights. And so when I did that, I did follow-up letters, I informed the General Assembly in New York, I informed the Human Rights Council in Geneva and the High Commissioner, and there was no reaction. It's just like a dark family secret that everybody knows about, but no one dares to talk about. And so I felt I need to inform the public that the institutions and mechanisms we have created to protect our human rights, they don't function in practice when the national security state is being, challenged.
Well, this is quite an epic piece of work. You've been working on it. You've been there for Julian Assange for a long time. We only got a minute left. Your thoughts about the trial that he just went through, and what's your outlook towards the future of Julian Assange? We have less than 2 minutes.
Yeah, you see, there's obviously countless left and right turns that this could take at any moment. But if you look at the big picture, for 10 years, it has been stable. You have 4 countries persecuting Julian Assange, using prosecution for political purposes, which makes the prosecution becoming persecution, in order to silence him, in order to set an example, to threaten, to intimidate all other journalists in the world, saying, if you ever get the idea of doing what Julian Assange has done, to publish our dirty secrets, then that's what's going to happen to you. So I don't expect that these states have invested millions in his persecution just to let him go. They will ensure that he remains in prison or is broken psychologically before he's released. Okay,
we're going to get you back on real soon and really dig into this book on Julian Assange. It's called The Case of Julian Assange, A Story of Persecution by Nils Melzer. It will be out soon in English, and Verso is the publisher of the book. I want to thank you for being on the show today and doing this twice, basically. We'll put the other one on the website later on. Dr. Melzer, once again, it really is a pleasure. This is Randy Credico, live on the fly, 99.5 FM in New York City. We've been talking to Professor Nils Melzer. Once again, thank you, Professor Melzer.
Thank you for having me.
All right. We'll see you soon, folks.